5 young men on a musical expedition to a destination unknown. Main songwriters Travis Lewis and Boomer Clarke co-wrote a song for the Monkees' 4th album, and their friendship with one of the members of that group helped the band seal a record deal with Colgems Records in the spring of 1967. In November, the group would release their debut album, which would almost immediately fade into obscurity. The group struggled on to the next year, but would end up ultimately disbanding before the end of 1968. After the end of the expedition, the members of the group went their separate ways, some achieving more fame and success than they had ever seen before, while others faded into the background. They were the Lewis and Clarke Expedition. Let's check it out. You know, for a group of explorers, these guys were really good at covering their tracks. And research was difficult for this. I kept getting info on these 2 dudes from 1804 who were exploring some western territory. I don't know. Weird stuff, man. Weird stuff. But seriously, though, research for this was really frustrating. Like, I couldn't find certain details that I really wanted, but I could find information that I didn't need. It was kind of cool. Like, you know, for example, I was able to find that they had an endorsement deal with Vox Instruments, but I couldn't find any interesting studio or concert stories, that kind of stuff. You get the point. But, I did what I could with what I've got, so let's begin. The band formed at some point in the mid-60s from the ashes of a folk band called The Survivors, whose members included Michael Nesmith, Travis Lewis, Boomer Clarke, John London, and Bill Chadwick. The group ended after Nesmith left to audition for the Monkees. John London would follow Nesmith, helping him out with the Monkees project both musically and being a stand-in for him on the show. But he would eventually leave the Monkees project entirely to focus on the Lewis and Clarke Expedition as their bassist. Multi-instrumentalist Ken Bloom, and believe me, I want to get back to that later, met Travis Lewis on the campus of UCLA. Quote, "He was the only kid in my English class who wore cowboy boots and that kind of stuff, so I figured he had to be cool. And we started picking together. And they did. But now all they needed was a drummer. And they had had a few drummers, but none of them seemed to work out, until John London convinced Johnny Raines to join the band as their drummer. And with guitarists and main songwriters Travis Lewis and Boomer Clarke leading the way, the expedition began." Now you're probably thinking to yourself, I've never heard of any of these guys before. Well, if you're a Monkees fan, then you know Lewis and Clarke. Does this song sound familiar to you? What am I doing hanging around? I should be on that train and gone. I should be riding on that train to San Antonio. What am I doing hanging around? Yeah, Travis Lewis and Boomer Clarke penned the song for the Monkees' Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited album. Also on that album, and maybe if you're a bit of a more hardcore fan like myself, you might know this one. Don't call on me when you're feeling footloose and fancy free. John London co-wrote that song with Michael Nesmith before the Monkees even existed. But anyway, back on topic. Supposedly the group released their debut single, Expedition West, and For Your Freedom Tonight, sometime in 1966 on Chartmaker Records, but like a lot of information I'd like to have, I can't find any on it, or any audio, for that matter, or anything other than the fact that Rate Your Music says it exists, so, please enjoy this generic stock music. The band signed with Colgems Records in the spring of 1967, and there's no doubt in my mind that they had help from Michael Nesmith to seal the deal. They eventually released their debut single, I Feel Good, I Feel Bad. I feel good, I feel bad, I feel bad, I feel good days are the ones that make me mad. I think of all the good we had, and I feel good, I feel bad. With the B-side, Blue Revelations.
I saw it all in a blue revelation. I saw it all in a flash of light. I saw it all in a blue revelation. I saw it all.
the single charted, reaching a peak position of 64 in September of 1967, and would remain on the chart for 4 weeks. Unfortunately, it would be the group's only record that would chart, leading many to refer to the group in retrospect as a one-hit wonder. By this point, work had begun on the group's debut album, which would be produced by Jack Keller and recorded at RCA Victor's Music Center of the World in Hollywood, California. The group would issue one more single before the release of the album, Destination Unknown. The B-side, Freedom Bird. But as previously stated, the single did not chart. Regardless, the album was finished and released in November of 1967. Now, I discovered this album from an ad on the sleeve inside the Monkees Present album. It was advertising other records available on the label, and the cover immediately caught my eye, though it was kind of small and black and white. Plus, with a crazy name like the Lewis and Clarke Expedition, I knew I had to look into it. And initially, I really wasn't impressed, and I forgot all about it for 2 years, and suddenly the name just popped up in my head, and I looked it up again, and the first song I heard was House of My Sorrow, and it just knocked me out. And I knew I had to get a copy of the album, and I did. Now, there's actually some confusion as to what the actual title for the album is. The liner notes on the back of the album, written by music supervisor Lester Sill, are prefaced by the title Earth, Air, Fire, and Water, leading many to believe that this is the album's actual title. However, on the spine of the album, it just says the Lewis and Clarke Expedition. So I'm going to assume that the album is self-titled, as many others do. Lester Sill's liner notes are quite cheesy indeed, comparing Travis and Boomer's exploration and songwriting to the expedition of the real Lewis and Clarke. But other than that, it does point out a few things, notably the importance of Ken Bloom. Quote, Ken Bloom adds depth of meaning with one of many instruments, 45 in all, he has studied since childhood. And it's true, under the personnel list, it lists his instruments, and he has 6 times the amount of instrument credits as the rest of the group. Yeah, I did the math. Some of these instruments I've never even heard of, and forgive me as I butcher these. The Bowzuki, Chalameu, Ezraj, and Vina. I have no idea. And had the group continued on and made more albums, he definitely would have helped the band stand out in comparison to other groups at the time. But not only that, he actually arranged 3 of the songs on the album: Blue Revelations, Memorial to the American Indian, and my favorite song on the album, House of My Sorrow. Since I'm here, I might as well go over the highlight tracks on the album. The 4 I already mentioned previously are great and I like them a lot. Others include Windy Day.
And I will stop and say, thank you, Windy Day.
This Town Ain't the Same Anymore.
I walked the shadows of a back street yesterday. I couldn't find the place.
House of My Sorrow, as previously stated, honestly to me it's the highlight of the whole album.
Just beyond you are nothing but fear. Life all alone and the passing of years. Silent sorrow much deeper than tears. In the house of my sorrow. And I'm begging you don't make...
I Call Them Lies, which now that I think of it kind of sounds a little bit like wind chimes from the Beach Boys' Smile Sessions album. And Memorial to the American Indian, which is actually broken up into 4 parts, The last part you might just recognize.
They took the whole Indian nation and put us on this reservation. They took away our way of life. The tomahawk, the bow, and the knife. They put our peppers on our days made in Japan. Cherokee people, Cherokee tribe.
Yeah, the Lewis and Clarke Expedition recorded the song 4 years before Paul Revere and the Raiders, who at that time were just going by the name the Raiders, did. Though admittedly, the two versions of the song are a little bit different. Now, the only song that I don't like on the entire album is Chain Around the Flowers. It's just slow and cheesy, and there's this talk part in it. I just don't like it. But it is bearable, and it doesn't really bring the whole album down. With the track listing out of the way, I want to return to the liner notes for a second, because unfortunately I feel the last line is worthy of note. Prepare to explore with them now and in the future.
Future.
Yeah, about that. I don't know how the album was received critically at the time, because I can't find any reviews from the time. It seems to have been praised in retrospect, however. AllMusic gave the album a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Unfortunately, these positive reviews came many decades too late, and the album tanked upon release. It didn't even chart. Personally, I think this was due to a lack of promotion. An article in Billboard magazine from September of 1967 mentions that the band played a gig in Atlanta that no one attended. What? Was it due to a lack of promotion? And why would you put that in there in your magazine for everybody to see? I mean, I understand that Colgems was preoccupied with the Monkees. Heck, they had 3 #1 albums that year, the third of which came out the same month as the Lewis and Clarke Expedition album. But come on, there had to have been some resources left over, right? Regardless, the band would struggle on into 1968 and release 2 more singles. The A side of the first, Why Need They Pretend? Was unfortunately paired with the B-side, Chain Around the Flowers, as well as Destination Unknown appeared in the Columbia Pictures film for singles only.
Speeding through the night and getting nowhere fast. Here today and gone tomorrow, you'll be part of my past. But my hopes never die. I'll be searching the sky. Destination unknown. Who knows where the gun has flown?
Now this is where my info that was very limited to begin with starts to dry up entirely. But from what I've gathered, after this point, both Ken Bloom and Johnny Raines left the band. And John London would also, but not before making an appearance on an episode of I Dream a Genie. The lineup that appeared on the show would include new members Doug Dillard, formerly of the Dillards and later of Dillard and Clarke, and new drummer Bo Wagner. The episode the band appeared in was titled My Guru and featured their new song Bring the Sun Down. But unfortunately, other than that episode, the song has never been released.
Hey, would you quieten down, please? It's my neighbor. Yeah. Hey, could you cool it? Could you touch my neighbor's? Hey, would you? Hey, man, look for my tree, baby. Remember who you are, will you? What a great sounding garbage can! Hey, Susie! Susie, would you please?
It is I, Master. This is such fun.
Would you take that silly outfit off, please?
Oh, but Master, it is my thing.
Please! Water!
Now, I have no way of confirming this because I've only been able to find it in a Facebook post, though I did try to find more information on it. Supposedly, after this point, John London left the band, and Doug Dillard did also. He wasn't in there for a very long time. But supposedly, the remaining members of the group recorded an entire second album that was produced by Gary S. Paxton and also featured session guitarist Clarence White before he joined the Byrds. But at the end of the day, all that ended up getting released was the group's last single, Daddy's Plastic Child.
Sally's from the wrong side of the tracks, you know. It's not the going over, but the coming back that's oh so wrong. She's daddy's plastic child, and she must learn to bend to things like this because her parents tell her what is right for her is not the same as what is right for them.
With the B-side, Gypsy Song Man.
I'm Gypsy Song Man, yes sir, you like to hear my song. I'll play it for you now, and I'll sing it all night long. If the blues is all you see, and a song is what you need, Gypsy Song Man.
And I'm assuming Bring the Sun Down would have been on the album as well. Now, like I said, I have no way of confirming any of this, but there's a few pieces of information on the group's last single that help add up in my mind to support the story here. The first of which being that the single was produced by Gary Paxton and that Clarence White was involved. Clarence White actually helped out with several other of Gary Paxton's projects as a session musician. The other thing that makes sense in my mind is that the single was just credited to Lewis and Clarke. I think that had something to do with the lineup change. But regardless, it's just a theory. But if the tapes do exist, currently they're wasting away in the vaults in the Paxton estate, and their future is uncertain as Gary Paxton died in July of 2016. If anybody has any information on the group's second album or any unreleased recordings or any information in general that I missed here, I'd really appreciate if you left a comment, because I know I'd like to know and hear this stuff, and there's probably plenty others who would like to hear it too, so thank you. But regardless of my theory here, the group eventually disbanded after that last single, which was released in September of 1968. And, yeah, this is a good time to mention that Travis Lewis and Boomer Clark don't actually exist. They were just stage names for Michael Martin Murphey and Boomer Castleman. But they may as well have been separate people because none of them really did anything musically quite like this ever again. Michael Martin Murphey would continue to work as a session player and songwriter for a few years before releasing his debut solo album, Geronimo's Cadillac, in May of 1972 on A&M Records. It actually has a version of What Am I Doing Hanging Round on it, which I like a lot.
I should be on that train and gone. I should be riding on that train, San Antonio. What am I?
3 years later, he had a major hit in 1975 with the song Wildfire, which would be featured on his 1975 album Blue Sky, Night Thunder. Murphy has won several awards, and as of the making of this video, has released 34 studio albums. His most recent album, High Stakes, was released in April of 2016. Murphy still plays music, records, and tours to this day, and you can find more info on him from his official website. I'll put a link in the description. In 1968, Boomer Castleman invented the Bigsby Palm Pedal, a successful guitar accessory which basically acts as a whammy bar for each individual string. He would go on to do various session work and would appear on several of Michael Murphy's solo albums. He scored a minor hit in 1975 with Judy May, which went to number 33 on the Billboard charts. It would be his highest charting solo release.
Judy May, oh, she sure had a way of looking after me. Yes, her eyes will sparkle and shine every time Mama got her ready to leave.
In 1991, he started his own record label, B&A Records, which lasted until 2012 when it was completely absorbed by Columbia Records Nashville. Castleman died on September 1st, 2015. He was 70 years old. John London would do various session work and would go on to be the bassist in Michael Nesmith's post-Monkees group, the First National Band. And, yeah, that's really about it with John London. John London died on February the 12th, 2000. He was 58 years old. Ken Bloom would do various session work for a few years before releasing his self-titled solo album on Flying Fish Records in 1978. And man, on that cover, doesn't he look just like Stu Cook from CCR? Ken still plays and records music to this day, and you can check out his stuff on his website, which I will also put a link in the description for. Like everybody else in the group at one point or another, Johnny Raines would work as a session drummer and percussionist. For a while in the 70s, he was a secondary drummer for the Dillards. He also apparently did some session work for David Cassidy. Now, interesting side note here, both Ken Bloom and Johnny Raines can be heard on the Monkees' Head soundtrack album. I'm not going to go over the other minor later members of the group because they were barely involved, if at all, so if you're interested, you can look that up for yourself. In 2016, Wounded Birds Records reissued the group's only album on CD, making it the first re-release of the album since its initial release in 1967. It has all of the album's tracks and 4 bonus tracks. 3 are the non-album singles, and there's another one on there called Slave Medley. I have no idea what that was from because it wasn't released at the time. It could have been an album outtake, it could have been meant for the supposed second album, but I don't know. And I was hoping that the CD would have some informative liner notes, but it really doesn't. And even worse, the information on the back is kind of incorrect. It says that Ken Bloom and Johnny Raines were on everything, but they weren't on Daddy's Plastic Child and Gypsy Song Man. But that's only a minor nitpick. I mean, I'm glad to see the album and those songs reissued again for the first time since they were initially released. And I'll put another link in the description if you want to pick up a copy for yourself. Okay, well, if you made it this far, I definitely want to say thank you very much for watching. This is the first video that I've done like this, and I definitely want to do some more for some minor artists as well as maybe some major ones too. I don't know. But yeah, thanks again for watching. So, in conclusion, I just want to say the Lewis and Clarke Expedition, that album, and the band in general, really is a hidden gem. Not on the level of something like Big Star's #1 record or anything, but it's a good album, and they were a great band. Definitely worth your time to listen to and check out. So, thanks.